So gathering the prerequisites. Again, I've mentioned it before, but SharePoint 2013 comes with a prerequisite installer that greatly assists in this. That being said, the prerequisite installer only works if your server can actually see the Microsoft server. So it actually does go out and pick up those prerequisites that you need. If you don't have the capability to give the server access to the Microsoft sites, it will also help you with letting you know what you need to go get and help you script those as well. So even if you have a server that maybe is not going to be allowed to see outside your environment, it can still assist you with those capabilities. There is one thing to note. Some people have seen errors with the install or the prerequisites install. There is a knowledge base article that can really help you out with this, 2765.26.0. Take a look at that, and it'll give you instructions on a hotfix that can help you out with that. Gather up any additional products or add in any items that you want, such as existing custom templates or developed features. These all should have been identified in your planning phase and your requirements phase. So you should have all those together. But when you're getting ready to start putting the bits on the servers, it's nice to have them all in one folder or one location rather than in maybe a document or an Excel spreadsheet. Having all the bits ready to go really helps speed things up. So installing those prerequisites. We're going to go through and in the demo put this in place. You'll actually see right here, this is what the products preparation tool looks like. You can see that it actually goes through and will give you restarts as it works through its process. Again, in the demo we'll go through it, but you can see right here that it's gone through and it's added the .NET Framework 4.5, already installed, didn't need to do it. The Management Framework 3.1 was already installed, no action taken. The Application Server role, Windows Server IIS, requires a restart. So it's going to go through there, and you can see it work down through each of those tasks and take care of it. So it makes it very easy to go through and get what you need done. Note that it does log everything, so if you do want to go back and review what happens, if you want to do some test prerequisite installs or maybe script it yourself, you maybe more effective, you feel like that, or want to be able to go into place and be able to do that manually, it's giving you those log files so you can actually see what's happening behind the scenes. The install options themselves. If you're a SharePoint veteran, you'll remember that there's been lots of different install options as you've gone through the actual process of getting SharePoint on the servers. The SharePoint 2013 installer can generally customize the role of the server and the file locations. Most of the rest, as we've seen over the generations, the number of options at this level has been dropping. We've kind of gotten to the minimum, I think, at this point. Most of the options that you're seeing, that you may have seen in your installer, are determined by the server setup itself. Generally, what you want to do is you're going to get those bits onto the server, and then once you do that, you'll either go through the central administration, which we'll walk through, or the PowerShell applets or commandlets to be able to do those settings. Depending upon how you want to do it, if you're more of a go through and do a review manually, the central administration is going to be where you want to go. If you want to set one up that way and then script it, the PowerShell is going to really help you with that as you move through. Really, the main thing you want to look at here is that role, and then the file install locations can be customized here if you want to. However, you generally don't want to worry about that too much. If you customize on one, you generally want to customize on each to make sure that the configuration database is in sync for all of those. And you want to make make sure your servers are as fungible as possible, that you can replace them, move them around, that you don't have anything really custom on those. So the recommendation is not to worry about that unless you have some really important reason, such as maybe you've got a non-writable file system that you're mounting the operating system on and moving the writes off to maybe a secondary drive. If you're doing those, you're probably doing something fairly advanced, and you know that you probably need to dig a little bit deeper into that and make sure it's going. So you can see right here, this is the Microsoft Server 2013 trial. Goes through and you've got a complete or standalone. If you're going through the different editions, you'll see different options here on the server types, and you'll be able to go through and put the different capabilities in there. You can see the file location tab behind it that you can actually change that. Again, unless you have a really good reason, leaving it in default is going to be your better option. So we start out with kind of the simplest of it all, your evaluation standalone server. Again, you've got two types of standalone servers in SharePoint 2013. This shouldn't be really new for you. If you've done SharePoint deployments before, you've seen this before. The SharePoint evaluation installs SQL Server Express, which has a 10 gigabyte limit. It's useful for developer workstations or planning or evaluation. This is really, really useful for not needing a lot of setup time or not needing a lot of work to be able to drop in and give you a small SharePoint server, generally in a virtual environment, maybe a Hyper-V or VMware, that you can set up for a developer to test their work on, or to actually do development against, to do debugging and maintenance on, or even to give to your project managers or your workflow process people to have a server that they kind of get carte blanche on, and they can actually have the full of rights to be able to go through and work on what they need to, and then be able to move it over into possibly even another SharePoint evaluation VM that can let them see what happens in a lockdown environment. So you get a lot of capability to get something up very quickly, to be able to get running, to be able to do rollbacks. It's a nice capability there. But you've got that 10 gigabyte limit. If you do need to put in a full SharePoint install, maybe this is the SharePoint single with full SQL database, local or remote. The SharePoint documentation actually mentions that it can be used for less than 100 users. I'm not sure I would recommend that, but I've seen it happen before, and it's something that maybe you have a small team. Maybe you actually want to dog food a SharePoint server while you're going through the requirements or planning phases, and have the people who are doing those requirements live in SharePoint while they put it together. They want to let them test things, let them see how things work. Putting this in is a very low resource way of having a SharePoint server, again, maybe on a VM, maybe on a older server that a small number of users can go into, to be able to do some rubber meets the road testing or living on it to make sure that what they come up with and what those plans are valuable. Maybe this is a team breaks off and maybe geographically remote. This is small enough you can actually send it with them on a beefy machine that they can work with things there, then bring it back and reattach the content database when you get back in. There's a lot of situations where you may want to look at that SharePoint single for kind of some special purpose situations. At this point, we're going to kind of look at the limitations of Foundation as opposed to SharePoint server itself. Foundation, again, if you're used to WSS 3.0, SharePoint Foundation system, all of this kind of stuff, you'll know that SharePoint Server is built upon Foundation and provides a lot of the collaboration functionality. When we go through configuration, we'll kind of see that the templates themselves are broken out in that as well. Enterprise publishing portals, enterprise collaboration portals, searches, those kind of things come up at the enterprise level. Foundation provides the basics. So you can actually see that if you just need a team server, if you need something like that, you may not need a full SharePoint enterprise deployment everywhere. You may want to break it up into multiple farms, that where you have your collaboration farm, which just has Foundation and then everything else. When you go through that, though, be aware that when you start looking at those higher level functions, such as your advanced search, your discovery, your business connectivity services, access services, Office web services, all of those kind of things start coming into play. So if you're looking at those balances of creating some of the smaller server farms with just Foundation and then having an enterprise portal tie them together, look at how that ties in with your installs and make sure that you're actually getting what you need in a good way. Now we come to probably the most well-known of the SharePoint deploys, Small Farm. This at one point was kind of viewed as the departmental SharePoint deployment. We come in and look at this. It builds upon the single server, but provides failover protection for the web front end, application services, duplication, and load balancing. So when you're looking at these, you're looking at, sometimes you're looking at additional capabilities, but more often than not, you're looking for making sure that there's no downtime, making sure that you always have a web front end up and going, or that the crawl index servers are always keeping the information up to date. So that's what you're looking at there, is doing a lot of the balancing there. That being said, it does come into factor with a lot more load capability, so you can increase the number of users you've got here. But just when you're looking at this, the primary pieces you're looking at is for that availability. Small farms generally contain 3 to 6 servers. Generally, you're looking at 2 web front ends, often with the application servers on those and then a database server behind it. You can come up to all the way through a clustered database on the back end, to web front ends, and to application servers. So at that point, you've actually got full load balancing, full failover recovery. So you're in a good shape there. So looking at that, you'll see that, again, on that top end of the small farm and the low end of the medium farms, you're going to see some overlap happening there. And you're looking at small farm. By the documentation, you can serve up to 10 to 20K users, which often is good for all but the larger groups of SharePoint deployments. That being said, take that with look at what your response requirements are going to be. When you're starting to get up to that 20K, you're probably going to start seeing a little bit of slowdown, especially in certain functions. So be aware of what's going on. Have that farm that you can actually go through and do some of your management, do some of your performance metrics on, to make sure that you're going to be happy. You're not going to get up on the top end and start running into slowdowns and get unhappy users. When we talk about that, we talk about going up into the medium farm. Medium farms are targeted for either large or heavy user requirements. This is why the medium farms start at 10K as well. You look at what I just mentioned with the small farms are 10 to 20K. You see we've got an overlap of medium farms of 10K and up, because what this does is the medium farm allows you to start breaking off some of those heavier loaded functionality into their own servers. When we looked at some of the worksheets, you saw that one of the common things for a medium farm is to break off the search services off into not just its own server, but its own group of servers. So you have failover, but you also have dedicated servers doing all your indexing, doing all your crawling, maintaining that search database that's going to be used in the rest of the farm. So you can actually have that taken into place. With 2013, you're actually looking at being very granular for that. So pretty much any of the services that you see, and as we go through configuration, you're going to see capabilities of, you can break those off into their own areas in a medium farm. So while small farms have been very common in the past, medium farms with 2013 are becoming a lot more popular, mainly because of that ability to break off different functionality. If you start seeing one of those application services becoming a bottleneck, breaking that off into its own server, set of servers, even if they're just virtual, now you can keep the response rates up for your interactive usages while keeping that load serviced with additional hardware, additional capabilities. And again, the example of the medium farm is small farm with an additional search index and crawl servers, so you can keep everything moving and keep everything happy. But there's other capabilities as well that we'll talk about when we get into the configuration side. And the considerations for large farms. Large farms are generally very large user requirements, very complex loading, or simply just large numbers of services. If you've got an organization that's really kind of bought into the SharePoint for its portal to everything, as we look at more and more of software as a service with your applications, with line of business applications coming into SharePoint, with maybe reporting services providing the enterprise scorecards and all of that happening, more and more things coming in. Large farms allow you to actually not just break up the interactive and the application services, but actually maybe even break up some of those interactive capabilities into various locations. A common example of this is a large farm with maybe a publication farm sitting in there with all of the content for the enterprise, be it corporate communications, be it metrics, be it whatever, breaking off of that into a projects farm where each project has its own site in a project site collection, or maybe multiple site collections that handle just those specific types of things. Maybe planning has its own server because it needs to have large scale, highly tuned blob stores to be able to handle large design files or those kind of things. Maybe production floors need to have very rapid response, very real-time reporting on orders, to report on metrics and those kind of things. So at this point, you're looking at things being broken out into very specialized areas, but that are still very interrelated and are able to use resources between each other. And again, services such as Office web apps can quickly increase user utilization, require dedicated server clusters for various functionality like that. So if you've got a situation where your organization uses Excel extremely heavily, you're maybe a financial services group that has lots and lots of things going on in Excel, and you're using Office web apps to keep your footprint low and keep the risk of losing data on a desktop down, you may need to scale out the Office web apps and particular parts of Office web apps very easily. And now a large firm can allow you to have that capability of, again, increase the capabilities that you need in very targeted and very specific areas. The hybrid cloud side that you're looking at is a new capability in SharePoint 2013 that introduces the ability to provide functionality that spans local and cloud deployments. So you can actually have your core business or your core workflow processes inside your organization, but actually have part of it sitting up inside a cloud deployment. Again, a common usage may be user federation services through Azure Cloud Services, so that not only are your internal users provisioned and allowed inside, but your business partners or companies that are outside of your organization can actually hit your extranet services and be able to get information that they need. They'll be authenticated. They're managed the same way as your internal users. And through claims-based authentication, you can actually work through that Azure portal and connect them into your system, connect them into your implementations without needing to put anything outside your firewall. Business connectivity services instances provide gateways outside of local server farms as well. So if you need to actually do a BCS crawl or be able to do some integration with large pieces of data outside your organization, it may make sense to put the BCS instance in the cloud, integrated in with a local server, and just get the aggregate of what happens when the BCS processes that external content, rather than pull it all through your firewall, pull it all through your data connection, and process that raw information locally. So there's several instances where you may want to look at the cloud local hybrid. And then there's full cloud as well. SharePoint 2013 is certified for a full cloud installation. In fact, if you've got a Windows Azure account, you can go take a look inside the VMs area in Azure, and there's a SharePoint VM available for Windows Azure subscribers. You can actually go in and provision a SharePoint server with just a couple of clicks, have it up and running and ready to go. Very simple, very easy to do. This is also very good for your developer to do their testing, not only because it gives you a consistent environment between them, but it also means that each one of them doesn't have to have a full server class desktop or workstation. You can actually provision them fairly lightly locally and have them use as much CPU or as much storage power as they need up in the cloud. And then cloud installations are useful for quick evaluations, for what-ifs, for, hey, let's give that a try. You don't need a lot of hardware. You're only paying for the processing that you need for that minute. Actually it is for that hour. And then you go through and you can spin something up very, very quickly, see what you need to do, test it out, work through a couple of different scenarios, and then roll it right back or get rid of it once you've got your answer. So very useful to go in and put those in place. And then at the end, before we get into the install, we've got the PSConfig. PSConfig tool is still around, command line tool, management tool. When you go in and do the actual install, it's actually using the PSConfig tool as well behind the scenes. So this is going into place. If you're used to this, this is should be familiar territory with you. Does require administrator access. This is a good thing because you don't want people to be able to go in and do some of the things that PSConfig allows. Things such as connecting databases, repairing connections, checking your server farm, adding servers into the farm, those kind of things. These are some of the capabilities you want to be able to go in and hand those management tasks, to be able to put them into place and really have it work well. And it's most commonly used for setup. It's also the tool that you'll use to do patches. When you get updates for SharePoint, you'll use the PSConfig tool to do basically a deployment of any patches that Microsoft releases and come in and kick those off if you're still doing those manually. So you'll have that in place, you'll be able to work with it, and it's one of those pieces that you won't use a lot, but when you need it, it's very, very useful and very valuable. So we're I'll finish this up and go into the demo, which is where we really want to take a look at the install. The install will be single server evaluation mode instance. We're going to do the base Windows Server 2012. That's no R2. The database will be MS SQL Server Express. We're going to be doing that single server evaluation mode SharePoint. The virtual machine has 8 gig of RAM and 4 virtual cores. A little note here is that if you have a virtual machine set up with 4 virtual cores, sometimes you'll run into problems if you're looking at less than 4 cores. The team has really kind of looked at that server piece. If you notice, none of the servers on hardware are looking for less than 4 cores. So if you're looking at less than that, you may have some situations where you run into issues. If you do, if you have just a single core and you have problems, bump it up to 4 and you should be in good shape. So now we're actually on to the bits. I'm glad you stuck around with me this long. You can see we have Windows Server 2012 with computer name Win Server 2013 for our SharePoint generation. The server is attached to a domain, so we're having domain accounts. If you have local accounts, be a little bit aware that some things as we go on further on may work a little bit differently. One thing I do recommend before we go into this SharePoint install is to turn off the IE Enhanced Security configuration, at least for the install process and for configuration. It's nice to have all the enhanced security. You shouldn't be browsing the web from here. But that being said, it does make configuring SharePoint a little bit challenging. So turning it off for right now, if your processes are to always have it on, come back and turn it back on after we get SharePoint installed. So with no further ado, we will start and go to where we have our SharePoint ISO mounted. And nice and simple enough, we're going to run the splash and come up with SharePoint 2013. Now you've been along with me throughout the process to this point. We've already reviewed the hardware and software requirements. Recommend you read the install guide, but we've kind of looked through what we're looking at there. The upgrade guide, we're going to look in the next module, so you can bear with me and take a look at that if you feel like it, but we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next module. And now we come to what we've been showing you is the install server prerequisites. So we kick that off and come up into a piece. This should look like the screenshot. Now here's a nice piece here is if you're going to do this with a server that cannot connect to the internet, you've got a nice list right here of the different roles, the different pieces that need to be in place on the server. When I was talking about if you're doing local accounts rather than domain accounts, note that the app fabric is one of the challenges there, so that's one of the things you'll need to look at. We're on a domain, so we should be in good shape. And we can learn more about the prerequisites here if you want to do some additional documentation or dive a little bit deeper into it. That being said, we're not going to do that. We're going to go forward. We're going to click the button. And we have, as you'll see, there are lots of different terms and agreements that we need to look at. We can scroll down, as we always do, and read very carefully all of our rights and what we're agreeing to. Go all the way to the end. You can see what we've got in this place, and next. So at this point, we'll let it run. You'll see that the application server role has started. As we saw with the earlier screenshot, this will run for a while, and we'll actually get all of the pieces installed. The server will reboot several times, so if you're sitting in front of it, be aware of it. If you're remoted into the server, note that you'll lose connection a couple of times as it reboots. And while this process goes on, we can do whatever we need to. Maybe fill out your email, hit some support tickets, do the rest of your planning, whatever else you need to do. And about to start. Give you a nice little thing to listen for at 28 minutes. And so now you can see after a reboot and a good bit of downloading and installing, we can look down our preparation tool and see that we already had Microsoft.NET Framework 4.5. We already had Windows Management Framework, and everything else was installed successfully. Run down through there. If we feel like it, and I'm sure many of you will, we can review the log and run down and see everything that occurred and see what items happened. We can see an IIS reset, install time. We can see where it was actually going through and checking how it went through, updating the progress bars for us, and on through there. So we now have our prerequisites set up for SharePoint Server 2013. So we'll click on Finish. And now we have our product preparation tool complete. As you can see, we had one more additional reboot and came through and set everything else up. We have our last update package, and it's letting us know to keep your Windows Server up to date, which we all do. And there may be other prerequisites at some point. So we can go look at those, but for right now, we've got what we need out of the preparation tool. I'll click Finish, and now I will go and relaunch our setup. And we will actually install SharePoint Server itself. And as the splash screen comes up, we have our software prerequisites done. And now we'll come down and install SharePoint Server. It's going to wait for the necessary files, set everything up. And if you're doing this for, if you're installing this for your production, you would put your proper product key in here. What we're going to do in this example is we're actually going to put in the key that Microsoft has for the SharePoint Server 2013 trial. Please note that this is a SharePoint Server Enterprise key. So when you put this key in, if later on you want to convert to your own production key, you cannot downgrade to SharePoint Foundation or any lower level or SharePoint Standard. So if you're going to want to have one of those and do an evaluation and then move into production without reinstalling, you'll need to actually get one of those keys. Either if it's a dev environment, you can use your MSDN key, which is for development purposes, or if you're going into production, you'll need to actually have your production key to put in there. But as I said, for right now, we're going to use the trial key, which you can find on the TechNet website. And I'm going to do the old school, which is actually type it in. And we saw it validate it, and we're good to go. So I will continue. Again, we see the list of all of our rights and responsibilities and license terms, and as we always do, we'll go all the way to the bottom. And ideally, you would know exactly what's in here. I accept it, and I continue. I am actually going to do for this one a standalone, which includes my SQL Server 2008 R2 Express Edition, so I don't actually have to have SQL installed on this or a SQL Server somewhere else. We'll do this just for compactness for our demo and for as we work through the class itself. If you already have a SQL Server that you can use for the back end, it does help with the resource loading on the server, even if you're doing an eval. But for right now, we'll just go through and put everything on this one farm. If you were going to change the file location, this is where you would. Again, I recommend leaving it where at the defaults. It just makes it easier both for working with additional maintenance and keeping everything in sync. Though if you do have some good processes for making sure everything's common and changed up, you can use PowerShell to set this up instead of manually entering in those, and you can script this. So at this point, we will install, and now once again, we will see the little progress bar go across as the ISO puts all the bits onto our server. And we'll let this go, and in a few moments, we'll have it done. You can see we've successfully come to the end of the installer, and to complete it, we need to configure the server itself. This is looking at the command line tools. This is what we were talking about, coming in and showing you how the PSConfig is managed behind the scenes. That's what's going to happen when I click close here. So let's get to it and get you onto the configuration wizard. Here we go. We're going to continue the wizard and start configuring and go through our additional items. It's going to recycle the IIS, the SharePoint Administration Service, and the SharePoint Timer Service. So we're going to see those going as we go through the process. So click yes here and let the wizard get started. You can see we've got 10 tasks to go through. So we're currently creating the configuration database. You'll notice that if we've got it installed locally, so that'll take some time to go through. If we were remote, we'd actually have a little bit more hardware associated with it, but then we'd also have just a little bit more latency as we go back and forth between the servers. All right, our configuration wizard is complete. You'll take a look at it. It shows finish to close the wizard, and it'll take us to the default SharePoint web application homepage. You'll see that we'll probably need a little login when we get in there, and once we get to that point, then we will be finished with this demo. We'll come back in another module and start configuration and all the rest. But for now, let's go see the results of our labors. And here we go. It's our first time on this instance to come up. I'm actually not going to use recommended settings because you can see it's going to put some additional compatibility in, and we're going to be doing some additional work here. So I'm not going to do this. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask me later. And you'll see we've come up onto our SharePoint site. We have our base layout. And as you can see, we don't have anything installed just yet. It's asking us for a template to create a new website. So we have our SharePoint server installed.